The 1970s might be the least appreciated era of the NBA, but is full of iconic players and teams. The reality is that the talent that we saw in that decade was as good as any other era. In all honesty, it's too much to put in one video, which is why I'm going to divide this up into a series. In part 1, we're going to highlight 6 different players that had historically great seasons. That includes Kareem Abdul Jabbar in 1972, Jerry West in 1970, Pete Maravich in 1977, Rick Barry in 1975, Tiny Archibald in 1973, and George Gervin in 1979. Come enter the time machine and let's appreciate this incredible era of the NBA. Be sure to comment on your opinions on these players and the type of seasons they had. Out of the 20 seasons that Kareem played in the NBA, there is one that stands out from the rest. That's his record-breaking 1971/72 season. Since we're talking about one of the greatest players of all time, this is also one of the greatest single seasons ever. There's even a case to be made that it's the greatest. What was the driving force of this iconic season? Let's consider the context. In the previous year, the Milwaukee Bucks won their first title in franchise history. It was as dominant of a season as you'll ever come across. They won 66 games in the regular season and went 12-2 in the playoffs. Kareem won the regular season and Finals MVP that year. This was something that surely boosted his confidence. In just his sophomore season, he knew that there was nobody that could touch him. Now he knew how to win in the NBA to go along with his tremendous set of skills, and he put that all into good use. What he ended up accomplishing was historic. Take a look at the advanced numbers that he recorded. He earned 25.4 win shares. That is the highest mark in NBA history. The 18.3 offensive win shares and the .34 win shares per 48 minutes are also the all-time record. There was nobody that was impacting their team the way Kareem was. He was a combination of two of the greatest big men that he took the torch from. He was the most dominant offensive force since Wilt Chamberlain, and he was swatting shots as if he were Bill Russell. Scoring at that rate while being the ultimate rim protector was a huge asset to have in those times. And there was nobody that was touching the numbers that he recorded, not just for that era, but also in modern times. He averaged 34.8 points on 57% shooting, 16.6 rebounds, and 4.6 assists per game. That is the highest scoring average of his 20-year career and the second highest rebound average. From a historical perspective, he is the only player to average over 55% from the field while scoring at least 34 points per game. When we think of dominant big men, we surely bring up players such as Shaquille O'Neal and Wilt for the physical advantages that they had over their opponents. However, Kareem displayed that same level of efficiency while utilizing a wide array of shots to score whenever he wanted. For example, this is what the New York Times wrote about Kareem's performance that season. Quote, "At the heart of Milwaukee's confidence is Kareem Abdul Jabbar, the 24-year-old giant. His immense offensive skills make him nearly unstoppable, even against Wilt Chamberlain, the 35-year-old Lakers superstar whom Abdul Jabbar seemingly has replaced as basketball's premier offensive center." End of quote. He brought up Wilt Chamberlain for a reason. That is because everyone was watching when the Milwaukee Bucks faced the Los Angeles Lakers that year. The Lakers were in the most literal sense unbeatable. They had the most impressive win streak in NBA history when they won 33 consecutive games. There was only one team that had a chance to break that record, and that was the defending champions. When they faced on January 9th, it was televised nationally, and the world was ready to see one of the most hyped regular season matchups. This game can still be seen in its entirety today. However, it's one of the few games where we can watch Kareem from that season. So to have an idea of how he was performing that year, here are some of his most notable plays from that game.
Here is Abdul Jabbar inside against Chamberlain. He got it. Contact inside. Dandridge goes sliding. Jabbar whirls to the baseline. 42-40 Milwaukee is Abdul Jabbar. Gets it in there. Just over Wilt Chamberlain. Kareem had gone out then as he should have. Jabbar again. In it goes to Jabbar. Slapped away, but he gets it back and missed the shot. Rebounds it and scores.
If you noticed, there were barely any sky hooks, Kareem's most signature shot. And there's a reason for that. He made a subtle adjustment by setting up to the right of the basket instead of remaining in the spot he prefers on the left. The idea was to overcome Wilt's greater strength by moving in close to the basket. In the second half, he discarded the hook shot completely and turned to face Wilt, shooting short jumpers over him. The Bucks ended up beating this legendary team by 16 points. Kareem ended with 39 points on 53% shooting, 20 rebounds, and 5 assists. That performance proved more than anything that there was much more to his game than just his sky hook. That is certainly his claim to fame, but during this time, his athleticism allowed him to do so much more. You can take it from me or from some of the people in the league that witnessed him play. For example, check out what ex-player Wayne Embry mentioned to Newsday back in 1972. Quote, "Look at his hands, the quickness in the way he dribbles. Look at his moves. Look at his passes. You'll hear people say he wouldn't be playing pro basketball if he weren't 7 feet tall. But he would be playing this league if he were 5 feet 11. End of quote. It was his skill set that allowed him to dominate at the level he did. For example, there were 5 games where he scored over 50 points. This was a season where he scored his career-high 55 points against the Boston Celtics. And he even scored 50 points against Wilt Chamberlain late in the season. There weren't many players during that time that could score 50 on Wilt, but there was no stopping Kareem. It's no wonder that he won the MVP and scoring title that year. You can also say that he recorded those career numbers out of necessity. If you read some of the articles that were written during this time, the perception was that the Bucks were not as strong of a team as the previous year. The reason was due to some of the roster moves that were made. In the end, only 5 members of the 1971 championship team remained. On top of that, Oscar Robertson was battling through injuries and he missed a total of 18 games. However, the numbers tell us a different story. Milwaukee won 63 games and never lost more than 2 consecutive games. They currently had the 5th highest margin of victory in simple rating system for a single season. Kareem was once again the leader of a historically dominant team, and for this season, you could say that they couldn't do it without him. As great of a regular season as he had, he couldn't carry his team to a 2nd consecutive title, just like every other player during that decade. But he was extremely close to making that happen. The title was going to go through the 69-win Los Angeles Lakers. When they faced each other in the conference finals, it was the Bucks that gave the first knockout blow. In Game 1, they destroyed them by 21 points. As a team, the Lakers shot 27% from the field. If they were able to pull out a second victory on the road, they would have put themselves in a golden opportunity to win the series. And that's what nearly happened. In Game 2, they played the greatest game never seen. You won't be able to find the full game to enjoy, but some of the people who were there to see it mentioned it was an entertaining back and forth battle. The final score was 134 to 135. Kareem ended with 40 points on 58% shooting, 7 rebounds, and 7 assists. But the unsung hero for the Lakers was Jim McMillan. He finished with 42 points on 64% shooting. He was their X factor from the moment he replaced Elgin Baylor in the starting lineup. Right after his retirement, the Lakers started the 33-game winning streak. He was such an important piece to that team. In this critical game, he gave as good of an Elgin Baylor impression as you could ask for. It was also reported that Jerry West made some big shots at the end of the game. If it wasn't for their clutch performances, they could have gone 0-2 headed to Milwaukee, and the Bucks would have been in a prime position to reach the finals. They could have suffered another bitter end to their season, but the Lakers took control of that series and eliminated them in 6 games. Kareem didn't end the season with a title, but that doesn't take away from what he accomplished. He simply lost to a better team that was desperate to win a title. There's no shame in that. I believe this is one of the top 5 greatest regular seasons by a player. Out of the 14 seasons that Jerry West played in the NBA, there is one that stands out from the rest. That's his iconic 1969-70 season. Since we're talking about one of the greatest players of all time, this should also be considered one of the greatest single seasons ever. However, he got snubbed from some important individual accolades. Unfortunately, this made this season supremely underrated and forgotten. It's time to revive a season that has some incredible ups and some heartbreaking downs. First, let's consider the context. In the previous year, the Lakers had the biggest offseason the NBA had ever seen. They traded for the 4-time MVP, Wilt Chamberlain. He was going to join forces with the greatest perimeter duo, Elgin Baylor and Jerry West. The expectation was a championship. Anything less would be considered a huge failure. And that's exactly what happened. To add insult to injury, they lost to their hated rival. This was supposed to be the year they had the talent to beat the Boston Celtics. Instead, Jerry West was forced to carry this super team on offense. Although he had won the finest series of his legendary playoff career, it wasn't enough to get the job done. All that disappointment and anger surely was a motivating factor for how he's going to tear up the league. But that wasn't the original plan. The priority was to figure out how to play alongside two incredibly skilled scorers. With 1 year under their belt, they now had enough experience and chemistry to start playing up to expectations. However, they suffered a major setback. Wilt went down with a serious knee injury after just 9 games. This forced him to miss a total of 70 games. To make matters worse, Elgin Baylor also missed 26 games. This super team turned into a one-man show, and West had to rely on players such as Mel Counts, Dick Garrett, and Keith Erickson for support on offense. None of these players averaged over 13 points per game for the season. Eventually, they were able to trade for Happy Hairston, and that gave the Lakers another 20 points per game score. But without Wilt there to anchor the defense, they were getting out-rebounded every game. They needed to completely change their defensive identity without a strong big man to protect the paint. To their credit, they were able to successfully stop teams at a high level. They finished with the second best opponent's points per game and the 4th best defensive rating. They used a lot of trap defense, which was the same formula that the New York Knicks used during their legendary season. Jerry West was in charge of their defensive attack, and he finished with the highest defensive win shares for the team. This is something that shouldn't go unnoticed. He gets so much credit for everything he does on offense, and rightfully so. We'll see in just a moment how valuable he was on that end of the floor. But we don't want to forget how legendary of a two-way player he was. On top of that, this was a year that he won his first and only scoring title. He averaged 31.2 points on nearly 50% shooting to go along with 7.5 assists and 4.6 rebounds per game. Up to that point, he and Oscar Robertson were the only players to average over 31 points and 7 assists for a season. If we include all of history, there are 9 players to produce those numbers. For the season, he had 13 games where he scored over 40 points, including 7 games where he had at least 40 points and 10 assists. This gives us an idea of the many hats he had to wear for this team. He was not only their defensive anchor, but he was also their primary scorer and facilitator. There weren't many times during his career that he had to carry a team without a star teammate, but this proves that he was more than capable of leading a team without a superstar cast. A perfect example of everything they had to do for this team came during a game against the Milwaukee Bucks. In the final moments, he made a 20-foot jumper with 6 seconds left. Then on the other end, he blocked the shot by John McLaughlin to seal the victory. He was their go-to scorer, defensive stopper, and the player they went to in the clutch. He carried this team in every aspect, and the Lakers were able to finish with the 5th best record in the NBA. That's not bad when considering how short-handed they were. That is why many basketball historians believe that this was his greatest season. For example, Sports Illustrated wrote, quote, This has been Jerry's year, his best ever as a pro. End of quote. Then Jerry admitted this to the Basketball Sports Stars magazine, quote, "I think I'm at my peak as a player. I know better how to play this game than ever before. I am a more complete player and a more consistent player than at any time in my life." End of quote. Many agree with that assessment. However, that wasn't enough for him to win the MVP award. He was runner-up to Willis Reed, the New York Knicks star center. Just for comparison, he averaged nearly 10 points and 5.5 assists less. It's clear that Jerry was better individually, but the players of the league opted to reward the best player on the best team. This was Jerry's take on this controversial decision. Quote, "I honestly believe a most valuable player should be a most valuable player. My conception is it should go to the player who makes the biggest contribution to his team. The thing against me is we're not in first place." End of quote. I believe his conception about who should win the MVP in any given year is spot on, and no one was more valuable to their team than he was. He finished with the highest win shares, offensive win shares, and PER in the league. He also led the league in scoring and was 4th in assist. This was his best opportunity to win his first MVP award. Unfortunately, he was snubbed big time. It would have been nice for him to be recognized properly, but he was much more concerned with winning his first title. Fortunately for the Lakers, they had their big three healthy for the playoffs. Wilt came back for the final 3 games of the regular season. That was both a good thing and a bad thing. Although they needed Wilt to win the title, they were also forced to adjust their style of play to accommodate the big fella. And they needed to make these adjustments quickly. They almost ran out of time in the first round against the Phoenix Suns. They fell behind 3-1 by losing each game by double digits. But the Lakers figured things out just in time by the dominant play of Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain. Each of them scored exactly 36 points in Game 5. Then in Game 7, Wilt recorded 30 points on 61% shooting, 27 rebounds, and 6 assists. The New York Times reported that he had nearly a dozen blocks as well. Now they had momentum on their side, and they swept the Atlanta Hawks in the conference finals. That set up the iconic final series against the New York Knicks. It was filled with so many memorable moments. Nothing was bigger than what Jerry West did in Game 3. It's one of the greatest shots in NBA history.
Busher shoots, hit, 3 seconds to go. 2 seconds, 1 second. West throws it up. He makes it. West threw it up and makes it. Over half court.
He made a half-court shot at the buzzer that forced overtime. It's a play that's synonymous with Jerry West. No matter how much the odds are stacked against him, he's going to do everything in his power to try to win the game. In many instances, he came through in moments like these. What's very unfortunate is that the half-court shot was worth the same as a layup. It only added 2 points to the scoreboard. In today's game, that shot would have given the Lakers the win. Instead, they went to overtime, and the Knicks ended up stealing that game. That 1-point difference might have meant Jerry capturing his first title. Instead, the Knicks eventually won in 7 games. They proved to be the better team, and Jerry West was once again overshadowed by Willis Reed. But that doesn't take away from what he accomplished. He came so close to culminating this legendary season with a title. If anything, this is the year that many basketball historians point to when discussing his legacy. It perfectly encapsulates his greatness. It was revolutionary. He was years, decades before his time. The numbers, the type of performances that he had were unlike anything we've ever seen. Watching him play, it was a mixture of Magic Johnson and Steph Curry. That's how talented Pistol Pete was. In the 1976-77 season, one of the greatest talents in the history of the sport was in his absolute peak. He was finally living up to his insane expectations. But just as it often happened with this player, there was controversy surrounding the greatest show on earth, not just with his opponents, but also his teammates. What's even crazier is that this season for Pete Maravich was very close to never happening. According to the New York Times, he seriously considered quitting the sport due to a lack of motivation. He said, "To play this game night after night, to get beat up and have your ankles broken and teeth knocked out, you wonder, why am I here?" You couldn't blame him for feeling this way. He had a constant struggle with injuries during his NBA career. In the 1975-76 season, he missed 20 games due to a series of injuries. But that wasn't the only thing that was frustrating him. Right in the middle of his prime, he was sent to an expansion team. The New Orleans Jazz were years away from being competitive. In order to acquire him, they traded away 2 players and 4 draft picks. They had no talent and no draft capital. In the best years of his career, he was stuck being a one-man show. That means no playoff success. That means everyone blaming him for the team's shortcomings. He even told the Florida News Press in 1974, "When you're with the winning team, basketball is fun. But when you're not, it's just your business. I don't think I'll ever be with a winning basketball team, and I'll always be blamed for it not being one." End of quote. All these factors surely played a part in Pete contemplating retirement, but he quickly snapped out of it. He knew he had to completely dominate the game if his team wanted any chance of reaching the playoffs. This is what pushed him to have the greatest season of his career. Take a look at the numbers. He averaged 31.1 points on 43% shooting, 5.4 assists, 5.1 rebounds, and 1.2 steals per game. Did you know that he's only one of 30 players to average over 31 points per game in a season? The numbers itself are impressive, but that doesn't even compare to the way he was producing his points. This is what caught the eye of everyone who was fortunate enough to see him play. For those born after the fact, there are only a few games available for us to watch, but we have plenty of testimonials of his teammates and competitors. They all agree that he was the best individual talent in the league, and maybe even of all time.
Handle, and people always say dribble, he handled the ball like it was a yo-yo. He could go this way with it, got that way with it. He could put it this way. Next thing you know, the yo-yo goes out that way, but the yo-yo was the basketball, okay? The basketball was like an invisible string on his hand.
He was a guy that could do it all. I mean, offensively, the things that he did, he practiced them. Nothing that he did was so much spontaneous. It was because he had done these things over and over again in practice.
But that's not all. Rich Kelly also said during the special season that he was an American phenomenon, a stepchild of the human imagination. Then we have what his coach, NBA legend Elgin Baylor, said about him. Pete was blessed with a great amount of ability, natural athletic ability. Pete could do a lot of amazing things with the basketball. He was really a showman. End of quote. But he wasn't just trying to wow the crowd. He was trying to do everything he could to carry his team to victory. This allowed him to produce some magnificent performances. There were 13 games where he scored over 40 points. Some of his notable stat lines includes what he did against the San Antonio Spurs. He had 40 points on 44% shooting, 10 assists, 6 steals, and 5 rebounds. Then there was a game against the Denver Nuggets where he recorded a 40-point triple-double. Prior to this season, only 9 other players were able to accomplish this feat. He also had 3 50-point games. Against the Phoenix Suns, he gave them a great mixture of scoring and defense. He had 51 points on 62% shooting, 6 rebounds, 5 steals, and 2 blocks. But nothing was bigger than what he did against the New York Knicks.
McElroy fakes the stutter move. Here is a pass off to the baseline. That is.
He's going to have to get help from the big man when he makes his move down the lane.
Pete Maravich. Good. 21 points for the Pistol right now. The Pistol fires. Oh, come on, come on. Here's Maravich. They got it to the guy they want. Pistol in and out of the lane. Here's his.
The task of trying to contain him, and that's a hard job to take.
Here he uses a pick and scores again. And look at his teammates rooting for him. Look at Coleman. Listen to the hand he gets with 68 points. They are announcing that it's the highest total by a guard in the history of the National Basketball Association.
He ended the game with 68 points on 61% shooting, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. Red Holzman, the Knicks head coach, called the best performance he's ever seen by a guard, and he was someone that witnessed Jerry West and Oscar Robertson play. But there's another aspect to this game that truly makes this iconic. Check out what his teammate, Mo Howard, said about his performance to NOLA.com. Once we started playing, this guy started making all these shots, shot making like I've never seen before in my basketball career. Pete's shots, if they had 3-point shots, he might have gone 80. End of quote. This is why Pistol Pete was ahead of his time. Remember, the 3-point line did not exist. There was absolutely no reason for a player to have that kind of range if a shot from over 20 feet is worth the same as a layup. But he was a visionary. This was something that he did on the regular. He was one of the very few players, if not the only player, to have that kind of range in the pre-3-point era. If he came after the fact, imagine what kind of damage he could have caused. The numbers that he was recording also highlight the maturity in his game. Elgin Baylor gave us a great insight of how he improved in this aspect. According to the Chicago Daily News, he said, "He has matured as a person during this time I've known him. Just before I took over, Pete would lose control of himself because of calls. Pete is an emotional guy and he would scream and holler for a couple of minutes. Now he's under great control." End of quote. The sports world couldn't help but admire the way he was impacting his team. It's no wonder that he finished third in MVP voting and was selected to the All-NBA first team. Prior to this season, he never finished in the top 10 for the MVP. Don't mistakenly believe that he was a beloved player. On the contrary, he was always a bit polarizing. But for one season, he was finally getting the respect that he always deserved. This growth in his game gave the Jazz a puncher's chance to reach the playoffs. In fact, with under 30 games left in the season, they were one game behind the 6th seed, which was the final playoff spot. Unfortunately, this is when everything crumbled apart. Shortly after this, there was 3 different stretches where they suffered a losing streak of 5 games or more. Despite his best efforts to carry his team on offense, the Jazz were just not good enough to be a playoff contending team. Although he was the only player in the NBA that averaged over 27 points per game, the Jazz had the 6th lowest scoring average in the league. The problem was that there was no one that averaged more than 13 points per game, and there was no one in the starting lineup that shot better than 50% from the field. It was not an ideal situation. In their defense, the Jazz did successfully add some talent to this roster. In the offseason, they added Gail Goodrich. We're talking about a Hall of Fame guard. He's a 5-time All-Star, but most importantly, he was a champion. He played a huge role for the iconic 1972 Los Angeles Lakers. You know, the team that won 33 straight games. They needed some veteran leadership, and they needed someone who could create their own shot. Although he was no longer in his prime, he was still capable of averaging over 20 points per game. In theory, this was going to drastically improve this team. They were still far away from contending for a title, but at the very least, they could finally reach the playoffs. Unfortunately, the NBA world did not get the chance to see much of this star duo. He only played 27 games that season. He suffered an Achilles injury. We all know what this injury does to players when they're no longer in their prime. He was never going to be the same player, and he retired 2 seasons later. With him gone, the Jazz were a one-man show in every sense of the word. This also caused him problems within the locker room. He gave the impression that he was the team, and that attitude never helps galvanize your troops when you're looking to make up for some major deficiencies. An anonymous league executive said this about Maravich to the Washington Post. Bill Walton used to think of himself as a trailblazer. Kareem thinks of himself as a Laker. Dr. J thinks of himself as a 76er. But Pete Maravich knows he's bigger than the Jazz. The problem is that he's right. End of quote. When a player carries himself that way, you're inviting criticism about your style of play. Although no one could deny his brilliant individual talent, he was accused relentlessly of being a lousy team player. The response to that was always, give him better teammates and watch him flourish with a more competent supporting cast. This thinking exercise was also presented to Pete during the season. According to a 1977 New York Times article, he was asked if he would accept a secondary role on a team with Kareem Abdul Jabbar. His response, "Are you kidding? I'll be his caddy. Anyone would like to play with the greatest center in the game." End of quote. All he could do was dream. He was playing at the highest level, but one great player could only do so much. The Jazz ended with a 35-47 record and they missed the playoffs. Although it was a disappointing end to his season, it doesn't take away from what he accomplished. Contrary to popular belief, the NBA was full of historically great talent during this time. This was the year the ABA merged with the NBA. This means the NBA had these players in their prime: Kareem Abdul Jabbar, Bill Walton, Julius Erving, Elvin Hayes, George Gervin, Bob McAdoo, Dave Cowens, David Thompson, Artis Gilmore, and more. With that in mind, there is a case to be made that the best individual player was Pete Maravich. The numbers and the eye test are certainly in his favor. But when we think of the value of this season after all these years, that is what makes this groundbreaking. It was way ahead of its time. He gave the blueprint for all the elite scoring point guards that we see today. As skillful as all these players are, many of them can't pull off some of the stuff Pistol Pete was doing. That is why this season will never be forgotten by true basketball historians. It's the end of the 1973-74 season. The Golden State Warriors had recently been eliminated from playoff contention. Rick Barry was furious with how their season was going to end, and he was going to take it all out on the Portland Trail Blazers. He scored his career high of 64 points on 67% shooting, along with 10 rebounds, 9 assists, and 5 steals. It was a performance of a lifetime. When the reporters went to him afterwards, he gave an interesting comment about his greatest individual game. Quote, "What significance is this now? All those points don't mean. It's nice to score that many, but the individual stat means nothing. Now if I'd done it when it meant something, I'd have something to talk about." End of quote. He had the right mentality. He was ready to win, and he realized that his team needed more from him if they were going to succeed. This was going to set the tone for one of the most iconic seasons ever. Prior to the start of the season, nobody was thinking that the Warriors were a championship contender. They lost the team's second leading scorer, Cazzie Russell, in the offseason to free agency. Then they traded away their defensive anchor and Hall of Fame legend Nate Thurmond to the Chicago Bulls for Clifford Ray. They were both over 30 years old, and the Warriors were seeking to get younger players that would buy into their team-oriented system. They weren't going to provide Barry with a star teammate to ease his load, but instead, they had a variety of capable scorers that were always a threat to having a big game. But this system was only going to work if Rick Barry was capable of playing at a high level in all areas of the game. This was something that many critics thought that he couldn't do consistently anymore. He was not in anyone's good graces since he left to play for the ABA. He wasn't the first player to leave the NBA to play for his rival league, but no one did it in the manner that he did. After leading his team to the finals in 1967, he shocked the sports world by signing a 3-year contract worth $500,000 with the Oakland Oaks. This would make him the highest paid player in basketball. However, this violated the contract he was already in with the Warriors, and the team took this matter to court. They agreed that he violated the reserve clause in their contract. He was forced to sit out the 1967-68 season. He eventually got what he wanted by playing in the ABA, but his reputation was soured permanently. He was viewed as greedy, unloyal, and a traitor. After 5 years, he came back to the Warriors in the 1972-73 season. It took him a while to regain his footing. In his first year back, he averaged 22.3 points per game. That was 12 points less than in 1967. There were doubts if he would ever be the same player. But after 2 years, he was ready to prove his doubters that he was not only the same player, he was better. He posted a stat line that only the greatest wing players have been able to record. He averaged 30.6 points on 46% shooting, 6.2 assists, 5.7 rebounds, and 2.9 steals per game. He is only one of 5 players to average over 30 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, and 2 steals. That list includes Michael Jordan, Steph Curry, Dwayne Wade, and James Harden. The numbers indicate how deadly of an offensive weapon he was. He was the best outside shooter, the best passing forward, and believe it or not, you couldn't stay in front of him. For example, New York Knicks' Mel Davis said this about Rick after one of their games that season, quote, "He's a tricky player, he's an experienced player, a good shooter, and when you look for him to take the shot, He crosses you up and goes around you. Knicks forward Phil Jackson then made this interesting observation, quote, "His quickness is his chief asset. You try to play him without the ball, and he doesn't let you." End of quote. He was back to his old dominating ways. He was always a threat to putting up big numbers, but there was something that seemed different about him. He embraced the role of being the leader of the team, and that showed in the way he uplifted his teammates' game. Veteran shooting guard Jeff Mullins, who played with Barry before he left for the ABA, and then when he came back, said this about the improvements he made, quote, "There's no question in my mind that this is the best I've ever seen him play, with more desire, intensity, leadership, and everything else. He's the key. He can carry a team to great heights, and he shared himself with the younger players." End of quote. There were plenty of times when he was the greatest show in basketball. Let's check out some of his greatest individual games. His best performance came against the Philadelphia 76ers when he scored a season-high 55 points on 47% shooting, along with 7 steals, 5 assists, and 5 rebounds. There were also 14 other games where he scored over 40 points. In 3 of those instances, he dished out over 10 assists. Then there was a game where he nearly posted a quadruple-double. It came against the Buffalo Braves when he recorded the stat line of 30 points, 11 assists, 10 rebounds, and 9 steals. This played a big part in the Warriors finishing with the best record in the Western Conference. They also posted the highest points per game average and second highest offensive rating in the league. But it wasn't all him. Although no one else averaged over 15 points per game, the rotation ran about 10 players deep. That includes rookie Jamal Wilkes. His smooth scoring style helped to play a big part in many title-winning seasons for his career. Then there was Butch Beard. His high-quality leadership style helped the offense run so smoothly. He played very well with Rick Barry, and he used his size advantage to get good looks over his defender. Then there was Clifford Ray, who was an excellent rebounder and defender. Charles Johnson also deserves a shout-out for providing instant offense off the bench. They all contributed in a big way, but their success started and ended with Rick Barry. The numbers give him a strong argument for being the best player in the league. He finished first in steals, first in free throw percentage, second in points, and 6th in assists. However, he was snubbed from winning the MVP. He didn't just lose out to Bob McAdoo, but he finished in 4th place. Let's keep in mind that the players were the ones that selected the MVP during this time. It was obvious that they also didn't view him positively with all the history surrounding him. There's no other reason to explain why he didn't finish in the top 3. The only way he would gain their respect was to play strong in the playoffs. He set the tone for what he was going to accomplish right from the beginning. Their first playoff series came against Spencer Haywood and the Seattle Supersonics. In Game 1, Rick Barry had one of his most impressive playoff performances. He finished with 39 points on nearly 70% shooting, 11 assists, 8 steals, and 5 rebounds. His strong all-around play proved to be too much for the Sonics. But the key to their series win was the way they defended Hall of Famer Spencer Haywood. They contained him to 34% shooting for the series. With him struggling, Golden State was able to win the series in 6 games. In the conference finals, they were facing the second best team in the West, the Chicago Bulls. They had talented players such as Bob Love, Chet Walker, Norm Van Leer, and Jerry Sloan. What made them so special was their defense. They finished first in opponents' points per game and second in defensive rating. They were extremely tough. They were even able to take a 3-2 series lead. That is when Rick took over. In Game 6, he exploded with 36 points on 48% shooting, 8 rebounds, 7 steals, and 3 assists. In Game 7, he was very clutch and responded every time the Bulls scored in the final 2 minutes. He scored 4 points and dished out a beautiful assist. George Johnson also defended the rim extremely well. He had 3 of his 5 blocks in the final 2 minutes alone. This allowed the Warriors to pull away with a 4-point victory and to reach the finals for the first time since 1967. However, the NBA world was still not convinced, as there were 2 powerhouses in the East that were heavy favorites to win it all. The Boston Celtics and the Washington Bullets both had a 60-22 records, and whoever won their Eastern Conference matchup was going to be the winner of the Finals 2. The Warriors ended up facing the Washington Bullets, led by Elvin Hayes and Wes Unseld. The Warriors did not have much success against them in the regular season. They won once out of the 4 times they played against them. Nobody was giving Golden State a shot at winning the title. What happened next shocked everyone. In Game 1, the first half went exactly as predicted for many sports experts. They were up by as many as 16 points. The Warriors clawed their way back thanks to their strong bench play. Phil Smith and Charlie Dudley torched the Bullets in the second half. In the end, Rick Barry did the rest. With Golden State up by 2 with 40 seconds left, he made this clutch jumper to seal the game. In Game 2, the Bullets had another large lead. They were up by as many as 13 points. This time, Rick Barry responded with a marvelous performance. He ended with 36 points on 45% shooting, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. This game was won at the free throw line. He calmly hit 2 free throws with 23 seconds left to give them a 1-point victory. In the following game, they knew that Washington would play with a lot of desperation. Rick responded with his best game of the finals. He did it all for his team. He ended with 38 points on 52% shooting, 6 assists, 5 steals, 4 rebounds, and 1 block. With this exceptional all-around performance, the Warriors were in complete control of the series. The question now was, when would they be able to finish them off? In Game 4, the Bullets tried everything to cool off Barry. That includes trying to get him thrown out of the game. Early in the first quarter, Mike took a swing at his head. Before Rick could respond, Coach Al Attles came to the defense of his star player. He heard that the Bullets would try something like this, so he figured he would get thrown out instead. At this point, the Warriors knew they had them. They used a total team effort to come back from another double-digit deficit. The Bullets, on the other hand, couldn't be more flustered. They committed a backcourt violation with 30 seconds left that squandered an opportunity for them to take the lead. And just like that, the Warriors completed the most shocking finals upset in NBA history. They swept the best team in the league and won their first title in franchise history. Rick Barry was awarded the Finals MVP. It was a culmination of one of the most iconic seasons ever. He was hated, counted out, snubbed from winning the MVP, but no one could stop him from leading his team to the top. It was record-breaking, innovative, and revolutionary. In the 1972-73 season, Tiny Archibald had one of the most historic individual seasons in NBA history. He broke multiple records that still hold today. As great as his numbers were, some basketball historians believe the legacy of this year is tainted with how the team performed. But after going through the full story, you'll be able to see why we should view this season with such high regard. Here are the numbers that he posted. He averaged 34 points on 49% shooting, 11.4 assists, and 2.8 rebounds per game. He led the league in scoring and assists. He is the first and only player to ever accomplish this feat. But that's not the only thing he accomplished. That's the highest scoring average by any point guard in league history. We interrupt this program for an important disclaimer. For all intents and purposes, James Harden is a shooting guard and will forever be considered a shooting guard in the basketball universe. He will not be included in the point guard discussion. Back to the program. From a historical standpoint, he recorded the 13th most total points and the 21st most total assists for a single season. He is also only the second player to average over 30 points and 11 assists per game in a season. The only other player to record those numbers is Oscar Robertson. He did all that while leading the league in minutes played. He averaged 46 minutes per game. That is the 8th highest mark and is the highest by any player not named Wilt Chamberlain. This was coming from a player who was 6'1" and weighed about 150 pounds. He was usually the smallest player on the court, but he excelled in a league full of giants. For a player his size to post those kind of numbers was simply unthinkable at the time. The best point guards of his era were considered big guards. The Lakers were using Jerry West as their floor general in the final years of his career. The Knicks had Walt Frazier, and Oscar Robertson was never considered an undersized guard. But Archibald proved that a player his size could dominate the court as well as they could. He certainly paved the way for all the small and speedy point guards that arrived afterwards. It's also important to note how much his game had progressed. This was only his third season. As is for most young players, he struggled at first. In his rookie year, he wasn't expected to start. That role was originally given to Flynn Robinson. However, it was reported that he held out, so they named the rookie as one of the starting guards. His numbers were pretty good, as he averaged 16 points, 5.5 assists, and 3 rebounds per game. In his sophomore season, his numbers went up tremendously. He averaged 28.2 points, 9.2 assists, and 2.9 rebounds per game. As much as he improved, there were some growing pains. According to the New York Times, they wrote that he continued overhandling the ball, throwing it away, taking poor shots, and playing too out of control. They reported that the team seriously contemplated trading him. They needed a big man, and they considered offering him to Chicago for center Tom Boerwinkle. Instead, they made the wise decision of keeping him. But there were two moves that they made that allowed Tiny to have the type of season that he had. They traded away Norm Van Leer to the Chicago Bulls for Jim Fox. Norm actually led the league in assists in Tiny's rookie season. He would later play an important role for the Bulls in their many deep playoff runs that decade. Then, one of their main scoring options, Tom Van Arsdale, was also traded to the 76ers for John Block. They needed him to assume those roles, and he ended up making history. The things that he was doing caught the eyes of players and fans alike. Check out what some of his former rivals said about how incredible he was.
Here's a guy that you really hated to try to guard because he'd come at you a mile a minute. He was quick, he was fast, he was left-handed, he was a dominant scorer, and a guy that brought fear to a lot of us in the NBA.
He was a zealot about his physical fitness and health. He used to bring a rope, a jump rope. He would do that like 25 or 30 minutes prior to the game. I used to wonder, where does this guy get all of this energy from?
Because, you know, to come in there with all of the big trees, and back then you had a lot of centers in the game that were just planted down there. He would come in there and attack you, and you would say, I'm going to knock this guy on his butt. You would knock him on his butt, he'd come right back at you again.
Left-handed, but the thing that made Tiny great is that he was ambidextrous in scoring and going to the basket and scoring. Very few left-handers would score as much as Tiny did going to the basket.
Our team was so weak offensively that he literally carried us on his shoulder. It's amazing we didn't wear him out.
You can't blame them for singing his praises. They were in awe of some of the things that he was doing. His speed, ball handling, and craftiness were too much for anyone to handle. That led him to have some historically great performances throughout that season. There were 3 total games where he posted over 50 points and 10 assists. Only James Harden in the 2018-19 season has been able to record games. His best game out of the 3 came against the Atlanta Hawks when he had 52 points on 68% shooting, 11 assists, and 8 rebounds. Then there was the game against the Detroit Pistons where he made more history. He had 41 points on 56% shooting, 21 assists, and 3 rebounds. That is only the 3rd time that anyone has ever recorded over 40 points and 20 assists. Oscar Robertson is the only other player to accomplish this rare feat. I mean, how could anyone hate on what he was doing? However, there's one aspect of this season that can't be ignored. As great as the numbers that he posted, the Kings finished the year with a 36-46 record. They failed to reach the playoffs. Should that taint the legacy of this season? Was this nothing but empty stats? Consider the context. Tiny Archibald was drafted in 1970, the same offseason that Oscar Robertson famously was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks. Even while having the greatest point guard up to that point, the Royals missed the playoffs from 1968 to 1970. Once they ended the Oscar Robertson era, it was clear that the Royals were in full rebuild mode. So a team that wasn't deep to begin with were even more talent poor in the first half of the 1970s. In reality, those monster numbers give us an idea of everything he had to do in order for his team to win games. The Kansas City Kings was a one-man offense, and their head coach Bob Cousy specifically designed their team that way. Putting the ball in his hands was their only hope of being competitive, and this young team would make fewer mistakes. When he wasn't present, the Kings suffered in a catastrophic way. There was one night he sat out a game with an ankle injury against the Detroit Pistons, and they lost by 44 points. It's clear that the only reason why they won as many games as they did was because of his high-level play. If there's one player who knew exactly what he was going through, it was Oscar Robertson. He was in his shoes for years. So when Sports Illustrated asked him if his ball-dominant style was hurting his team, he gave the reporter a serious look and said the only way his style could hurt them is if he played against them. Chicago Bulls forward Bob Love had a similar response. He told the magazine that Nate's one of the most unselfish players in the game, that he's seen him go a whole quarter without shooting. He added that the fact that he led the league in assists explains his unselfishness. It's good to see that his contemporaries were defending him, but we haven't heard from him directly. According to that same article, this is what he said about his mentality. Quote, "I was never a great scorer anyway. Anybody can score points, but running the ball club is different, and I can do that. Right now, I'm gonna have to score because we don't have the scoring punch of other teams." End of quote. I don't necessarily blame him for missing the postseason in a tough Western Conference where only 4 teams made the playoffs. Let's also keep in mind that the Milwaukee Bucks and the Lakers won 60 games and were pulverizing everyone. It just wasn't their time yet. Tiny Archibald did everything that he could for his team to win. That's all that he cared about. He fell short on that, but he ended up making history in the process. He also gave future generations of undersized point guards the blueprint on how to dominate the game. It makes you wonder what he could have accomplished if he had a better team around him during a time when he was young and healthy. When discussing the greatest scorers of all time, George Gervin needs to be brought up every single time. To this day, there aren't many players who can score in the number of ways as he could. The degree of difficulty in some of the shots he was taking was insane. At this point of his career, he already established himself as one of the best individual talents in the game. Now it was time to win the big one. He never got as close as he did in the 1978-79 season. This is where he proved that he could be the best player on a potential championship winning team. But first, let's consider the type of season that he had. He averaged 29.6 points on 54% shooting, 5 rebounds, 2.7 assists, and 1.7 steals per game. For the second straight year, he won the scoring title. But it wasn't just the amount of points that he was scoring that made him so impressive, but his efficiency. Did you know that there have only been 12 players that have averaged at least 29 points per game on 54% shooting for a season? That's the thing about the Iceman. It always seemed like he had it going. During this season, there were 9 total games where he shot over 70% from the field while scoring at least 25 points. There's no doubt that his most impressive scoring performance came against the San Diego Clippers. He scored 52 points on 73% shooting. The numbers were extraordinary, and as usual, he made it look effortless. This is a big reason why he was considered the best player in the world. The New York Times reported that year that many of his teammates and opponents mentioned that he was the best player in the game. He had the numbers and the team's success to make his case. The San Antonio Spurs won 48 games and had the second best record in the Eastern Conference. Efficiency was a big part of their offensive dominance. It all started with Doug Moe. James Silas explained perfectly what his philosophy was. He said this: he wanted to run and gun. When you look at how the NBA was playing before he merged, it was kind of a flow game. Walk it down and call plays. All Doug would call was a passing game. Pass and move, pass and pick. We had no plays, and it was fun. End of quote. That's exactly what you would see. I was amazed to see how little dribbling there was. It was one pass after another. It was constant moving. They wasted no time in trying to find the best possible shot. This put the defense in a disadvantage. This was on the half-court setting. But one thing about the Spurs, they loved to run. In the pre-Magic Johnson era, there wasn't a team that ran the floor quite like they did. This next player that we're going to mention provokes a lot of mixed emotions. That player is James Silas. In the ABA, the star for the Spurs was not Gervin, it was this guy. In fact, in the 1975/76 season, he finished runner-up for the ABA MVP. He was an incredibly talented and athletic scoring point guard. What made him such a special player was his tremendous clutch abilities. He was nicknamed Captain Late. He had the reputation of being the most cold-blooded scorer in the biggest moments. The broadcaster for the Spurs at the time mentioned in his book that James would have several 20-point fourth quarters, that he won a lot of games with last-second shots. With George Gervin quickly progressing in his game, this was supposed to be the next great duo. Unfortunately, he blew out his knee right before the merger. In the 1977 and 1978 seasons, he only played a combined 59 games. After such a brutal injury, he never had the same athleticism. He also had the luxury of playing with Larry Keenan. Just to give you an idea of how great he was, there are those who go as far as to say that his game resembled Julius Erving. He was a 2-time All-Star in the NBA and a 3-time All-Star in the ABA. This was someone who could excel in every facet of the game. He could crash the glass, score in the post, run the floor, and he was very lethal in the passing lanes. Then we have valuable role players such as Billy Pultz. His prime came when he was playing in the ABA. He made 4 straight All-Star appearances and he led the league in blocks in 1976. But from 1977 to 1979, there was a case to be made that he was a top 10 center in the NBA. He was perfect for this offense because he was equally as effective on scoring on the post and in the mid-range. He was also a solid screen setter and a very underrated passer. But a great system can only go so far without great players. It all started with the Iceman, George Gervin. Out of all the seasons of his career, this was his best opportunity to win the MVP. However, the league voters did not believe he was the most deserving. He finished runner-up behind Moses Malone. His rebounding numbers were ridiculous, but he was well behind in the scoring department, and the Rockets finished with 1 fewer victory. When it comes to MVP snubs, this one doesn't get talked about enough. As talented of a player as he was, it's almost a crime that he never won the MVP. But he had no time to worry about individual awards. He was more focused on overcoming his playoff demons. In the 1977 and 1978 playoffs, they ended their seasons without winning a playoff series. It was obvious that they needed something else to get them to the next level. That is when James Silas came to the rescue. Maybe he was no longer the same player, but he was finally healthy enough to play a full season. With him running the point, this team was more complete. Now they were ready to seriously compete for a championship. Their first playoff opponent was against Dr. J and the Philadelphia 76ers. This was an amazing battle between 2 of the best individual talents in the game. George averaged 26.1 points per game on 55% shooting, while Julius averaged 26 points per game on 54% shooting for the series. All the stars came to play. It all came down to Game 7 in San Antonio. At first, it was all the Spurs. They led by as many as 18 points in the second quarter. However, they lost the lead in the fourth quarter. The Sixers came all the way back. In the end, the Spurs were able to pull away with a victory. They won by 3 points. Credit goes to Larry Keenan, who had 18 of his 27 points in the second half. Mike Green also had 9 points in the fourth quarter. And the Iceman was cool under pressure. He had 33 points on 52% shooting, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2 steals. Their next battle was against the defending champions, the Washington Bullets. This was a battle between 2 of the 3 highest scoring teams in the league. At first, Washington couldn't keep up. They stole home court advantage in Game 1 by defeating the Bullets by 21 points. Once they went back to San Antonio, it seemed like the series was over. In Game 4, George had a marvelous performance. He had 42 points on 61% shooting. This gave the Spurs a 3-1 series lead. In order for the Bullets to make their comeback, they needed to attack San Antonio's weakness. That was their front line. Washington had the star duo of Elvin Hayes and Wes Unseld. For the next 3 games, they asserted their will, especially the Big E. He was punishing the Spurs on the post and blocking every shot that came in his direction. He had 6 blocks in Game 6 and 7 blocks in Game 7. Defense was the key to their comeback. But George Gervin was going to do everything in his power to carry his team to the finals. He had another incredible performance. He had 42 points on 52% shooting. With under 2 minutes to play, they had a 6-point lead. In the final moments, they made some crucial mistakes and they lost the lead. But it was Captain Late that made a huge shot to tie the game. The Bullets got the ball back with a chance to advance to the finals.
11, 10, Dandridge, bullseye!
Bob Dandridge was the hero. He made one of the few game winners that we've seen in a Game 7. This was the Spurs' best chance to win a championship. If they found a way to close out the Bullets, they would have faced the Seattle Supersonics in the finals. During the regular season, they split their season series 2-2. I know many Spurs fans would have loved their chances against that team, but they missed out on a golden opportunity to bring home the title. That concludes this video, but what about you all? Which one of these seasons do you think was the most impressive? Which one has stood out to you the most after all these years? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.